Listen here, man. Check this out. I got a deal for you that you will never be able to pass up, man. I mean, this deal is like the best opportunity you could ever think about. I'm willing to give you 500 pieces of widgets. No one can give you that. The best quality widgets on the block. If you go ahead and sign today, but you got to be able to sign today. If you could do that, I'll give you the 500 at the lowest price possible. Tell me what you think. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's not negotiating effectively. And it's probably going to make you sound like a con artist or a used car salesman. And on today's episode, my friend Andres is going to tell you why you should sell on emotions and not logics. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of the Sales Evangelist podcast. I'm your host, Donald Kelly, the Sales Evangelist, and I'm so excited for another great episode. I'm so excited to be here with you today. And on this episode, we have a fantastic guest. His name is Andres Lares, and we're going to be talking to you about negotiating based on emotion and not logics. So often we get caught up in this idea that we got to be logical. We got to talk about the features, and this is what's going to be beneficial for you, and blah, blah, blah. No, man, we need to get down to the emotion when it comes to negotiating. And Andres is going to talk to you about that. And here's why Andres is so amazing. Andres is a managing partner at a company called Shapiro Negotiations Institute and the co-author of Persuade, the 4-step process to influence people and decision. Now, Andres has a lot of experience working with negotiating huge contracts and for athletes and people working in the sports world. But the principles apply no matter if you're selling software, cars, houses, desk, chairs, rulers. The principles still apply. He's going to break that down for you. I won't take up much more time. As we dive in, you get a chance to hear who Andres is, but you go straight into hearing how we can go about fixing this issue. Let's do it. But there is a power in when we negotiate on emotion versus logics. Talk to me about that. Why is that? What are some of the things that we need to be aware of? And then we can take turns and just dive into some of those.
Yeah, perfect. And I think what you said there too, because I think there's two parts, right? One is the fact that, essentially no matter what, there's some negotiation principles that really apply across everything, whether you're negotiating with a team against the player, whether you're doing a multi-million-dollar merger and acquisition. I mean, all these things are, the same principles apply. Now you have to make some adjustments based on who's on the other side, how you prepare, size of deal, length of deal. But at the end of the day, those core principles are really across the board. And so then, the second piece you talked about is exactly that. We're, as negotiators, as influencers, we tend to really focus on the logic. We really need to be focusing on the emotion. What do I mean by that? So, for example, as a company, right? So we've trained 250,000 people over the years. So me saying that, that's not going to drive Donald, the potential candidate, kind of potential client, to say, wow, I really want to move forward with them. Now, that is going to mitigate the risk. So after that, if I share that, if Donald wants to go to his or her boss and wants to say, hey, these people have done it before. It's a proven service. It allows you kind of sleep at night. You're making a good decision. But the flip side, though, is the emotional connection will be, okay, at the end of the call, does Donald trust me? Does he feel like I'm going to make him look good within the organization if he decides to move forward with S&I? Those are the questions you really want to answer when negotiating and influencing. It's not, so it isn't like the stat sheet that people pull up. And that's one of the things that it's easier to do, right? It's easier to do because you can kind of always go back to that. It's much harder to probe and really discover what's the emotion that I'm going to pull as a lever to really kind of influence the other side.
Why should we focus on emotions? And then let's go into some practitioner about it. How do we go about doing that in the conversation? So the why should we? Because especially now more than ever, if we're going to assume kind of hybrid work is here to stay, and so we have less opportunities to go fly and see the person, have lunch with them, spend a day, things that kind of might have been 10 years ago, 3 years ago, 1 year ago almost probably, or just before COVID been the case. We have less time because we're online, and so more than ever, more competing distractions, shorter attention spans. That's where emotion kicks in. So the same in emotion, that also carries with storytelling, right? So those two kind of go hand in hand. We talk a lot about in sales, storytelling is really powerful. And the reason it's powerful is because it's emotional, right? The concept of a story is you put yourself in the shoes of the storyteller.
And that's why there's all these things, right? When you're using stories, you're not the hero of your own story. Well, fastest way to make it unemotional and disconnect for the audience is like Donald says, look at me, I'm the smartest thing in the world. You lose that kind of connection and that relevance. And so that's a perfect example. But that, so that's kind of answering both your questions and start getting into like the practical. What's a way to do it is telling a story, right? It's simple kind of cookie cutter method of here's another client that I kind of worked with that started with a similar challenge. Here's what we kind of work through, and here's the end result, and you kind of take them through it. And it signals a lot there that you understand what their challenges are, you have a solution that works, and hopefully that story doesn't have everything's not just roses, right? Hopefully there are some struggles along the way because it's real. You didn't just come in 3 days, say, hey, I fixed your whole business. Thank you very much. I'll be here all week. Try the veal. That's not happening. There is kind of a process. There's pain, and you want to be able to, to be real about that. The first step of the process is for influencing people is building credibility. And to what you just said, I'll give you an example of that that's really practical that anyone listening can use. And I say this really should be used genuinely. This is a perfect kind of place where, unfortunately, this can be misused. And I think that's where manipulation and influencing can kind of go. But it's statements against self-interest. So to what you just said, if I say, Donald, if 100% of the time we fix problems for companies like yours, I'm 100% sure it's going to happen. It works for everybody, and it's going to happen in a matter of days, right? Like, okay, how much do you trust the person? But if you use a couple of statements against self-interest, and they have to be real and genuine, right? So for us, for example, we're not a fit for everybody. I'll give you a real example again, just from our world. So we do a lot of sales training, and that's kind of fit into the negotiation influence training world. Our expertise is not prospecting. So a real thing that we say, because we want to save people time, we respect people, and we want to be, very clear about who we are, is our training is sales after prospecting. If you're looking for prospecting in particular with a significant focus, we're not the people for you. So we say that 99% because we want to save their time. And if it's not a fit, we want to save everyone's time. But a little bit of that we also say is because now people can really trust us. There's a credibility there when we tell you we are good at some things and not good at others. You're much more willing to really trust us when we say these are the things we're really good at, right? This is in our sweet spot because we were willing to tell you what was not in our sweet spot. And I think to what you said, that's really what's happening there is like Donald's thinking like, if everything's perfect, I don't believe it. It's too good to be true. But when there is something that isn't perfect, then you're more willing to kind of recognize the real successes.
What else may I not have asked when it comes towards helping myself or my team or the listeners to be able to be better at using emotions versus logics in our negotiation? Any last
So specifically around emotion and logic, nothing comes to mind, but depending on where you want to go, I think it makes sense to also talk about facilitating action. So if you're going to go there already, then then I won't go there. But if you were planning on going there, I think it's worth talking a little bit about that.
Yeah, let's talk about facilitating action.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, like if you kind of follow the process, so first is credibility. Statements against self-interest is one thing we talked about. So great, you do that. And you think of it as a pyramid. You build up because now I kind of have some credibility and I have some trust built up. So the second is emotion. So don't try to sell on logic. You try to sell on emotion and figure out what's the lever I'm going to pull, even just thinking of it that way. Then logic, one way, rather than kind of blurting out stats, you tell a story, and that would be logic. Hypothetically, again, I'm kind of taking shortcuts here, but that's what we've talked about until this point. So the fourth step, though, is I think any salesperson can relate to this. Like, Donald, is that, what do you think of this product? I think it's great. Yeah, do you think you're going to move forward? I mean, I'd like to. Yeah, it's great. And then you don't hear back from Donald for a few weeks. Now, I don't want to label Donald as someone who doesn't report. Hopefully he closed the loop. He's not that kind of guy. But unfortunately, we all can relate to people who, don't close the loop and they ghost us. And just as they might, the people on Tinder. And the thing is, why does that happen? And the reality is because we haven't facilitated action, right? And so facilitate action is to keep that momentum.
If there's one major takeaway you want folks to leave with from listening to our conversation today, what's that one major piece of advice?
That you put on too much seasoning on your food, I think. That's the main takeaway. So one main takeaway, I mean, it's really would be that idea, if you kind of a slogan in your mind that people make decisions emotionally and then they justify them rationally. So I think everything we talked about today falls under that. So, that's kind of less practical, more higher level. but it should drive the way you think, which is that you're not going to persuade someone with logic typically. You're going to persuade them with emotion. So think of it that way, and that should make you more successful.
Andres, if folks out there listening to this podcast want to get in touch with you and some of the cool things that you guys are doing, what's the best way for them to go about doing so?
So it's shapironegotiations.com. The website's probably, we're on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and all those things, but probably the website's the best place to start.
That was Andres Lares. I highly recommend you connect with him on LinkedIn. Find his information down below. Check out his book as well. We have a link going back to that. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click in the description down below and take advantage of some of the information we have on Andres. As always, just know this. My goal is to help you find more of those ideal customers. I want you to know what to say when you reach out to them. I want you to close more deals. But most importantly, I want you to raise your level of thinking and go out and do big things. Until next time.